This week we are looking into another facet of entertainment in heavy metal, which is a genre of music I, as you will find out as the episode goes along, know nothing about. Despite me and Dr. Marc growing up quite close to each other through our teenage years, musically we had very different tastes. This is an area that I have always seen the fringe of, not really been on the fringe of, so I'll let him open telling us how he got into it, but throughout it I want to find out, the reason we're doing this is for me to find out why heavy metal has the appeal it does and how an absolute pleb in the world of heavy metal or whatever it's called would get into it. So Marc, first of all, where did it all start for you?
We'll lift you out of that absolute being nature of yours, Marc, by the end of this. But you mentioned the right stage in our lives in terms of getting into this sort of thing, and teenage years is where it all started for me. So I'll put you in a scene. 14 years old, we were starting to get out of the sort of childhood games that we would play out in the streets of where we lived, and we wanted to venture out into town a little bit more, see what was out there. We were quite old enough to do the clubs and things like that. That would be a few years later. However, the compromise was going to an unders night in a club.
Excellent.
And me and my friend Mikey from back home, still good friends with him today, found this club in Glasgow called the Cat House.
Marvellous. This was you when you were 14?
14 years old. We thought, right, okay, we're going to try this out, see what it's like. We knew it was going to be a club of sorts. We knew it was going to be playing music that we hadn't really been into or we hadn't really explored a lot, as is the case with a lot of music in our teenage years. But we went along, we queued outside, early afternoon of course. It didn't have the ambience of darkness like most clubs
Absolutely
do.
Marvellous.
Certainly didn't have the oil of a few drinks, so quite nervous about this. We stood in the queue, got up to the front, we could see these sort of metallic Cat House deep red sign in letters. So okay, and we looked into the door. It wasn't straight into the club, there was a staircase up to it, and on the staircase you could see the names of some bands, none of which we knew at the time. We got upstairs, we got past the queue, we paid our £5 in, whatever it was. Us and about another 100 nervous looking teenagers. And by the time we got in, it wasn't when the club opened, it was already open. And as you go up those stairs that I mentioned, there's more to come. And there's a spiral staircase that goes up to one floor and then up to a second floor. We went all the way up to the top.
Okay.
And as we got up to the top, the music got louder and louder and louder. And it was unlike anything we'd ever heard before.
Yes.
It was like a gun, it was like a machine gun going off, and it's like, what the hell is that?
Mm-hmm.
It's like nothing we'd ever experienced before. And what made it even more surreal was that when we actually got into the room where this machine gun music was playing, there was almost like, I can only describe like a nucleus, a cult of people around this one person who was screaming their lungs out, and everyone was standing under this one speaker where the music was playing out from.
Wow.
And all these people knew what this machine gun music was, and they were singing along to these lyrics, and everyone was like bailing guts and gore and absolutely loving it. These kids were already there, they were already into this thing, whatever the hell it was. We had no clue, but after that point we thought, this is something we need to check out right now. And for us, that machine gun music, that first song that we heard was a song called Master of Puppets by Metallica.
Wow.
So that was the first time for me and for Mikey that we'd ever really been introduced to them in such a social environment as well. Not just hearing it, but it's hearing all these other people react to it in the way that they did. And that was the start of a massive journey down heavy metal for us.
So that's really interesting. So that is heavy metal, then, just I'm using the right terminology from the start. You would count that as heavy metal, or is that what you called it when you first discovered it?
It's a good question. You could probably put it in the realms of heavy metal. Those who like Metallica and bands like Megadeth or Anthrax or Slayer, bands like that are in what you would call thrash metal.
Okay.
So if we go back to the top of the umbrella, metal is the all-encompassing term. Then heavy metal, thrash metal, doom metal, glam rock, all these things are underneath that.
So you'll lose me very, very soon, but I'm going to insert myself where I can at this point. So while you were doing this, it's interesting you say Master of Puppets turns out to be that song, because that's one of the songs I know.
Oh, really?
And that's a surprise, because there's probably 5 to 10 metal songs I could name, and that would be one of them. But it's one of them I couldn't recognise or sing, but I would, after a while, I'd go, I know this one. This is that, the Puppets one, that's my level. But while you were bravely going into the big city and going to an unders club, I was back home in East Kilbride going to a youth centre on a Friday night called The Key.
Yes.
Did you ever come to The Key?
I remember The Key well, yeah.
We used to go on a Friday evening, and that was the closest I got, and it was a Friday evening, so we were out at night while you were in the afternoon, but we were all the kind of small town, like-minded people going to this thing, and I was going because my friends were going.
Yeah.
And I was friends with people who back in those days were called grungers.
Oh, yes.
And it was the baggy jeans and the hoodies and the skateboarding and things like that. We were not, I was never fully into all of that. I liked the people, I liked the chat. I had a Limp Bizkit hoodie, based purely off of Rollin', let's be honest. But that was it. And I remember getting jeans for Christmas. My first pair of baggy jeans were Slipknot jeans, but I didn't like Slipknot. So this is because I was a cool teenager. My mum sewed Lego patches over the Slipknot on the back of my jeans. So I was going out, like, I didn't have Slipknot jeans, I had my Lego jeans. Because I knew enough about metal that I knew Slipknot.
Yeah.
I'd seen them on Kerrang, because that was another thing that was accessible, really. And I didn't like the look of Slipknot. Their songs weren't catchy to me. I was still coming out of a pop into a Lionel Richie phase. I was probably discovering the 80s at this point in my career. So it wasn't similar to what everyone was hearing, but in The Key you would hear Aha. You would hear Kiss, that you were talking about glam rock. You'd hear Kiss and Bowie and things like that. And it was a real mix of outsiders, but the majority were grungers and thrashers and skaters and all of this. So the music in The Key, there was a jukebox, or it was probably Kerrang on the telly, but it was all that kind of music. They had band nights, and it was before indie, so it would be maybe a kind of pre-indie acoustic guitar, Mumford-esque stuff.
Maybe some 41
Exactly, some 41 types, and then there would be a thrash band on it, and it would be, how do you know that thrash band? Oh, they've got long hair.
Yeah.
Nice one, right, long hair, jaggy guitars.
Yes.
Oh, and I would walk in and oh crap, it's a band night, the pool tables aren't out. I hated band nights. So I was the wrong clientele for The Key, so that was my introduction to all. So it was more in the background of other things that were going on.
Yeah.
Like I was going to meet friends and to do it to skateboard, quote unquote. But you were going to seek out something new, which is, and maybe where our sort of path crossed is, I went somewhere and something new was happening, but you were going to seek it. And I'm guessing that's where this love has come from. So what's your next step at 14? Because this is 2002, 2003.
Around then, yeah.
This is pre-Spotify.
Before all of that.
I suppose, not long later we'd be getting LimeWire to ruin our family computers to download viruses for a half-hour download of one 33-minute song. What was your next step to get into, to even find out that song was Master of Puppets? Like, how did you ask someone? Did you not realise till later?
So Mikey, the guy that I was with on that first trip, he had a few friends where he had started to hear whispers of these bands and what that music was all about. And from that, both of us found out that there was various CD and record shops around Glasgow. Mm-hmm. And so the step after going to the Cat House that night was to go to one of these shops. You know, before those software, before those web services were around, like Spotify and all that sort of stuff, we were going to these shops and we were flicking through the M section.
Right.
You know, we were looking for Metallica, and we were looking for, we'd heard that song was also the name of that album that we wanted to learn more about. And then when we got there, this was another new and exciting experience. So you got to this M section in the record store, Metallica, Master of Puppets, there it is, and you pull it out and this is this sort of dark orange cover, and then you see these rows and rows of crosses, like the crosses that you would see in a military burial ground.
Yeah.
And above that there's two hands coming down out of the sky, and out of those hands are coming strings, and the puppets are on the crosses. And at the time, that was, you know, there was layers and layers of stuff within that cover, not all of which I presume to have understood when I was 14.
Yeah.
But it was really provocative, and there was a lot of stuff going on there. And in a nutshell, it was us thinking, here's people who have got something to say that isn't another love song.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, this is interesting. We're at that age as well where it's not just the momentum of finding this one thing. We're at that age where, you know, you're finding out what you want to be, you're finding out what you are like yourself, your personality is really coming out, and you've got that whole momentum of saying, I'm finding out who I am, here's what I'm into, this is the thing that's going to get me there. And that music and finding those CDs was one massive part of it.
That's about, I mean, when you say about that, because I remember doing the same, and even because buying a CD when you didn't have money, if you went to buy a CD, you were buying one CD and that was it for the month, if not more, and that CD was going to get hammered. But even picturing you talking about that, because you know what the style of metal music album covers are like, but the thought of being 14 and flicking past, say, Mariah Carey, and the next thing you see is the styling of metal artwork is so iconic. It's a thing. Like you can see an album cover, and you know that they're a metal band from the style, their logo, name usually, and from this usually monstrous cover. And especially at a time where, I'd say you're 14, you're discovering things, you're intrigued by this dark world you're not allowed to talk about, but you're buying a CD, but you're looking going, there's some kind of monster controlling a cemetery here. It's compelling to use the title of the show. It is something that you look at and go, I want to find out more about this. And imagine if you're flicking through Megadeth, Metallica, you're just seeing art, just art on art on art on art on art, flicking through it. I'm going to ask a question here, because on a daily basis, whenever I see you, the chances are you'll be on a black t-shirt with a metal band art cover, album cover, single cover, gig t-shirt. Regardless of the day. I mean, seeing you after work, seeing you in a shirt is unusual now, no matter the occasion. You'll be wearing something inappropriate, to be honest. Like if you go to a nice dinner and you'll be sitting in a Slayer t-shirt. Do you remember, and when did you start? What was your first t-shirt? Or do you remember going, I like this so much, I'm going to wear it?
I remember it so clearly because I've still got my first t-shirt.
Wow.
And I remember where we got it. So as you can tell, and for the people listening, all of this is happening around Glasgow because that's where we grew up. And one of the shops that's sadly no longer with us in Glasgow was called Flip.
Yes.
You remember Flip?
Skateboarding shop?
Yes. So it was on Bath Street, next to one of the bus stops on Bath Street. It's still there. You can still see the remnants of the sign Flip and amongst all the dust from the letters being ripped down. It hasn't been occupied since that shut down.
Oh, wow.
That's at least 15 years ago. But you would go into Flip, and getting back to your point on several different branches of this music, you would go into the top floor and it would be all the sort of skater kid clothes. There would be the sort of the bright colours, slightly baggy trousers, and all the paraphernalia associated with the bands that were for the skater kids. But whereas the Cat House Club had stairs going up to it, at the back of Flip was stairs going down. And that's where we went. And when we went down, it was a much smaller space. But as soon as you got to the bottom of the stairs and Flip and looked in front of you, what you could see was wall-to-wall blackness and wall-to-wall t-shirts. That's what it was. So you would have a top sort of shelf or hangers full of t-shirts, and the bottom would be the hoodies. So there was all of that, and it was just pitch black. There was just enough space to walk through it. So if there was someone coming back, you were brushing past them to get through and flick through all of these t-shirts. And the final thing in there towards the back was another phenomenon of this sort of heavy metal clothing, which is patches.
Oh yes.
Patches that you would put on your jeans or on your bag. But it was in Flip and flicking through the t-shirts in there that I found my first one. And it was linked to the story from earlier. And it was an almost completely black t-shirt with the bright white letters Metallica across the chest. And it had that in the now iconic jagged dagger-like writing that makes up the name Metallica, with the M and the A at the bookends being larger and sharper than the other letters. And on the back of that t-shirt, what you can't see so clearly, but is faint by design, is a snake that goes up the back of it.
Oh, cool.
And I bought that t-shirt because I had that experience at the Cat House. I was getting into this band. There was this momentum before I'd even heard a lot of their music.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew I had to get into more of it. And I had this t-shirt not knowing that that was actually one of the designs for a later album. And that would come later.
Okay.
But that t-shirt remains with me, and many more like it, as you've surmised already.
So to jump back to the music, which is what the focus is supposed to be, is you see Master of Puppets in this collection.
Yeah.
Do you buy it that day?
Yes.
You have the bravery. This is where I wouldn't have had the bravery. Oh, that's that song, nice one. Let's leave. Whereas you bought it that day, went home, and I imagine everything changed.
It is a good point though, and I've mentioned Mikey a few times. The thing was having someone to have this journey with,
yes.
And we were both, I don't think egging each other on is the right term, but we were both so excited about it. If one was doing it, the other was certainly going along with it.
Okay.
And we were both there at the same time. We're like, man, there's 2 copies of this here, we both need to get it. We've got a tenner in our pockets, that's all we're going to spend.
Yeah.
And we're going to go back to one of our houses, put this in the CD player and crank it up and listen to the rest of it and see what the hell's going on here. So that was the way it worked. We both got it, and we did that for other albums subsequently.
Mm-hmm. So this is another thing tied, is around this time had you started playing music? Because as you say, it's kind of the growing of who you are as a person. So we've discussed the clothes, the art, the music, and I know eventually you got into playing music, so you weren't playing at this point.
No.
Like I know a few of our friends, for example, were doing high school music, and you'd hear them talking. Like I remember sitting in 6th year, and they'd bring their guitars out in the open rooms, the kind of common rooms and things, and play because they could, and they're sitting like, oh wow, that's a talent they have. So it was much later you came into music playing. So if we'll hold off for now, if you can, do you know who your next got into? So if Metallica were it, they're number 1.
Yeah.
Do you remember going, that's like Metallica but not, or
oh yeah,
holy crap, this is something that's totally different, but it's a compilation album and it's the second after Master of Puppets, or I was going to say Run to the Hills, but I don't know if that's Metallica or Iron Maiden, so I'm not going to say it.
Find out. I'm sure there's someone listening to this screaming down their phone at the
definitely.
moment. We can get into more of the Metallica stuff in a moment, because after the Master of Puppets thing, that was definitely what came next. So Master of Puppets, this was like, because I know you're a Star Wars fan, this was like going into episode 4. You know, it's the very first time that you've watched a movie like this. This is changing everything. This is a sci-fi movie, unlike anything else you've seen. You're buying into this from the start, but you know going into it as well that you're nowhere near square one. You're going into that story right in the thick of it after something's gone down, and you're filling in the pieces.
Yeah, completely. When you see that yellow letter and you realise it's episode 4, you have to go, I need to catch up. Yeah, okay.
So when we found Master of Puppets, after we'd gone to the Cat House, after we'd gone to the record store and found the CD and bought it and brought it home, it was only then we realised that, in Star Wars terminology, that was episode 3.
Okay.
So there was 2 albums prior to that, and then in subsequent trips we were going back and looking for, you know, what was album number 1, what was the debut, and what was the one that followed up, and how the hell did they end up getting to this masterpiece, which was the first thing that we happened to stumble across. To get back to your question on another band rather than another album, you mentioned them without knowing you mentioned them. It was Iron Maiden, and it was along similar lines in that there was a lot of really, really fast-paced music. It was guitar-driven. There was drums that made the music sound like guns going off. But with Iron Maiden and the stuff that they still do that we can talk about later, as it was not as dark as Metallica's music, but it was very much story-driven.
So just to interrupt, when you say dark, do you mean in terms of the story and the themes, or is the dark a term of music? Because I can imagine what light and dark music would be. Do you mean the music was heavier and darker, or that it was like heavier themes and like blood and gore is what they're talking about?
I think both of them have had heavy themes, but in terms of consistently heavy themes, Metallica have definitely done a lot more down that line. So rather infamously now, there was once a magazine article talking about Metallica and the history of Metallica, and it summarised a lot of the lyrics as either being about war, insanity, or the insanity of war.
Right, okay.
So it was that level of depth and heaviness, and the music itself matched that. Where Iron Maiden was different was it still had the same fast pace, but it was more theatrical. There was even more I would say finger picking than there would be in Metallica, and the major thing that set Iron Maiden apart was the singing.
Okay.
It was a very, very different style of band for singing.
Okay.
And the songs were long, the songs were multi-parted, but the singing was operatic to match.
Okay.
So there was more of a theatrical, powerful nature to Iron Maiden, and you see that playing out when they're live. They have much more of a thespian take on what a stage show is like, whereas Metallica, it's all about them, it's all about them playing the songs and you hearing the songs and what they're singing about. They don't have as much theatre as part of their show. They never went down that line.
Yeah. Okay, no, 'cause this is where I'm definitely learning about these different genres. You mentioned history a few times. I mean, I'll need to stop talking my ignorance now. How old are these bands? Like, we are early 2002, you've discovered a band's third album. How long had they been around by that point?
So that third album for Metallica was out in 1986.
Right, so I'm sitting taking that as it was out fairly recently, but right, holy, so because that's what I thought initially until you started talking, and I was like, oh, I thought some of these bands were around in the 80s, maybe they started mid-90s. No way. Okay. And the other thing about that is, since we've already brought up Iron Maiden, if you start to put things chronologically, Iron Maiden were one of the bands who influenced and inspired Metallica. So Iron Maiden are even older. Iron Maiden were around since the mid to late 70s. Okay. And they were part of a movement which became known as the new wave of British heavy metal. Okay. And that's a mouthful, so you often see that written down as the acronym, as the first letters of that, the new wave of British heavy metal. Right. So what that meant was, almost like it's saying on the tin, they were one of these bands who came out of the UK, who were bringing this heavier music, this more sophisticated music, more story-driven operatic music that had some cleverness behind it, and they were one of a string of bands coming out of the UK that made countries like the US turn their ears in our direction. So where there, when it's a new wave, I assume there's been an old wave, which I'm thinking maybe Thin Lizzy maybe, or are they in the same region right now? Thin Lizzy, maybe late 70s, mid into the 80s. Yeah, some people might correct me on that. Thin Lizzy, Deep Purple, that was the sort of bands that my dad was into, so they were sort of operating in the 70s and 80s when they started. But in terms of it being a new wave, then it's new wave because if you're looking for an origin story, heavy metal began in the UK. That's what I was going to ask. You're saying it's a new wave of British. Yes. Is there an American? Because you assume it's Britain or America. It's Russian heavy metal, isn't that talked about? So like, I'm assuming there was an American thing for Britain to go, almost like punk-esque. Look what we can do, sort of thing. So, is there any names from America that I would recognise at that time, or that you know? From what sort of decade are we talking about? So if Iron Maiden are this new wave of British rock and roll, were they competing with or saying, up the Americans, look what we can do? Or was it not that? No, that's, if you read and listen to interviews with the guys from Iron Maiden, they almost sound very much like stereotypical stoic British guys, English lads almost. Okay. They pay very, very little attention to competition between them and anyone else. And one of the things that keeps them going, even now into their late 50s and into their 60s, is the fact that they're consistent. They give not two shits about what other people think they're doing. They keep going with what they know.
one of the, the leader of the band, the guy who founded it, Steve Harris, the bassist, in one of the interviews that I listened to with him on a Spotify show called Metal Talks, he openly said, look, I've never had writer's block. I'm enjoying what I'm doing, I'm loving what I'm doing, and there's always ideas there. Wow. And they're going into new songs and new albums. Yeah. They've never really stopped to have a full-blown crisis. They've definitely had stumbles along the way. Yes. They've had band members leave and things change, as many bands do. Yeah. But they've lived the course where many other bands have died out.
Right. Mm-hmm. So this is, and I'll get confused, look, that's Iron Maiden talking, and they influenced your Metallica.
Yes.
Okay. So if this is, this might be too big a jump here. If we call Iron Maiden 70s, would that be safe?
Yeah, that's when they started.
Would Metallica be the 80s then?
Absolutely.
So is there a 90s version?
Ooh, that's a really good question, because so metal and the sort of metal we've been talking about really took off big time in the 80s. Okay. So we've spoken about Metallica. Their inception was around 1981. Right. So they were 17, 18 years old, teenage guys. Okay. Who started this band. Other bands that were around at the time were the likes of Anvil, and then because of a spat within Metallica in their early days, one of the band members who got fired then started one of the other major bands at the time, Megadeth.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Wow. So there's a really big story in that. I'll get to in a second. But and around the same time you had Slayer as well, another band that you've mentioned. Right. So these bands were starting in the 80s and they were growing and growing and growing throughout. And by the time you get to 89, 90, there was whispers of a new type of music. Mm-hmm. A type of music you've mentioned in passing as a type of person. You called it a grunger. Yeah. It was grunge music that was coming out at the start of the 90s. And that was, let's call that a new wave of rock music, because people were getting a little bit saturated with metal in the 90s, apart from some bands who stayed the course. Mm-hmm. But it sort of started going on a little bit of a dip in the 90s before it then took off again. So early 90s you had bands like Melvins and Nirvana coming onto the scene, most famously. That's what was going on most in the 90s. If you go decade by decade, grunge is going to be plastered in the 90s. Okay. Heavy metal and thrash metal and glam rock are plastered.
Well, this is what I'm starting to think. So when you were talking about metals and you mentioned glam rock earlier, in my head I went, oh, hair metal, that's a thing, which I imagine is frowned upon in a lot of metal circles because it's basically a version of glam rock. Do you know when the splintering started, or when metal became... Did it start as metal? Did it start as heavy metal? When did thrash, hair, grunge start to be like, oh, we're doing it this way, doing it that way? Do you know?
We've got an idea of it. I think for people listening to this that want to get into metal, there's several really, really interesting documentaries around that are like 6-part, 8-part, 10-part documentaries about the story of metal. One is called Metal, one is called The Story of Metal. If you Google these things, if you Google metal documentary, you'll find them, no problem. And in those, you learn about all of that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Hair metal, glam rock, they're probably synonymous. Yeah. Bands like Bon Jovi to an extent, Motley Crue, Twisted Sister, Kiss, Poison, Scorpions, Whitesnake, Def Leppard.
See, this is where I would wonder, because I would like parts of Bowie would be glam rock, but I don't think Bowie would ever be metal. So this is where I get lost and confused, because the names you're saying to me, I'm knowing like Boston and Rainbow. These are these 80s compilation hair metal rock albums. Like it was just like the best rock. I remember my dad having best rock album in the world ever. Yes. That probably had Simply the Best on it, but beside Rock You Like a Hurricane and all this stuff. So hair metal just merges into glam rock, which then becomes just rock, which is more what I get into later in life, which is probably my entry point to these metals. Is there a point, would you say, that it's insulting to call Bowie metal, for example? Insulting is the wrong word for him, but Would you call Bowie metal?
No. And I don't know what I would call Bowie other than surreal. I rarely use the word genius, but innovator would be another one. But on this topic, whether it's rock or glam rock or metal, there's a lot of time you can spend wasted pigeonholing all of this stuff. And a lot of the time you spend pigeonholing things could be time spent discovering some of those bands. Some people love it, and you could talk to someone else who's into the metal scene other than me, and they'll have everything categorised as if it's a library, and power to them for doing that. But it's not really the way that I've gone about it. I think in my mind, if you do that, then you'll start to get into one thing. For me, I started off with thrash metal. If I pigeonholed myself in that then I might not have looked at some of the other stuff that came along later. And in doing that as well, you know, the pigeonholing is one thing, but as soon as you get into some of these bands, as I'm sure you could tell me about The Boss, there's so many awesome stories behind how that band have operated and how they came to be what you finally see. That's part of the charm as well. Like I just mentioned a moment ago, and you picked up on the Metallica Megadeth thing. So Megadeth came out of something that happened in Metallica. So Metallica started 81, 82, and they were made up of 4 guys: James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, John McGovern, I might not be pronouncing that right, McGovney I think, and Dave Mustaine. Those last 2 members, John McGovney and Dave Mustaine, are not the Metallica that people know. There's another 2 members which I'll mention later. John McGovney was the original bassist. He sort of disappeared into the ether and was replaced by one of the most revered bassists and metals of the time, Cliff Burton. Dave Mustaine, that 4th person I mentioned, was originally the lead guitarist, but when Metallica got going, they were all heavily drinking all the time, they were partying all the time, as you would in your late teens when you're starting off gigging. But at that time, and as the stories go, Dave Mustaine was taking it too far. And he wasn't performing and he wasn't reliable. So the band were looking to go places, they fired him. And he was bloodthirsty after he left Metallica. He wanted to destroy them in a way. He was utterly vengeful. It's an infamous story in the realm now. This guy was so pissed off. He had the world at his feet and he'd just been kicked out before they skyrocketed into fame. He knew he was a good guitarist. He knew Metallica were looking to make an impression on the thrash scene, to be a metal band who wrote good songs, long songs, fast songs. He wanted to write longer songs, bigger songs, faster songs. He wanted to be everything that they weren't. And that was the fuel that lit the fire of Megadeth. And they came on to be a massive band as well. And in terms of that area of metal, the thrash metal part of it, they became known as one of the big 4, which was composed of Megadeth, Metallica, Slayer and Anthrax. These were the 4 bands that were seen to be the innovators, the initiators of that movement.
Mate, well, that's the 4 I would have heard of. And if I was naming people, I would have said Iron Maiden because I know nothing. But I probably would have, honestly, I would have forgotten Anthrax until I was really struggling to think. And I only know Slayer because of a Halloween conversation that will come up later on. But those are the 4 names that a mainstream idiot like me would go, like if I had to describe metal, Metallica, Iron Maiden, I'd be like Megadeth. But I thought Megadeth were like 15, 20 years ago. I genuinely assumed, I think because the name Megadeth sounds more modern to me, I thought they were a new version. I'm stunned to believe they came from that exact era. So you're a Metallica fan, are you a Megadeth fan?
I am.
And is there any contradictions in that kind of a, not like Gallagher-esque or a Pete Doherty, Libertines sort of like there's a split and you go your separate ways?
There's so much of this in metal.
And I mean, you said already how you'd not want to pigeonhole yourself, so I would imagine you wouldn't be, but is that, you've just said it, it's prevalent in metal as well as high school girls basically?
And that's what it reads as sometimes. Because, and there is that split though, because people follow that story and they'll follow it almost like a soap on one side or the other. the people who are die-hard Megadeth to the bone fans will know that story of how Dave Mustaine started this new band, and will have sympathised or maybe even empathised with him that he was hard done by, or that's how they would have seen it. So they would have disowned Metallica.
Yeah.
And you will talk to some people who will be one or the other. Do you like Megadeth or Metallica?
Yeah, Paul or John.
Exactly the same thing in terms of the way people are thinking. For me, it's both. I don't care. For me, it's just an interesting story.
Yeah.
Being outside of it is part of what makes the songs that they then write.
Yes.
At the same time, it's part of what gives them the inspiration to write some of this now classic music that's out there.
Yeah.
So I love both of them. Some of the black t-shirts in my collection are Megadeth. Lots of them are Metallica.
Yeah. Are there, this is me, I just inserting my pop influence, are there songs, are the songs after this split, are the Metallica songs all about having a friend and losing him, and are Megadeth's early songs about shrugging off those guys you don't need to make it? Are they personal songs from that era, or is metal, you're talking about how it's war and insanity, or does metal not cover real life problems?
Oh, it definitely does. Yeah. And I think more of that came out in the Megadeth side, because especially Dave Mustaine leading Megadeth, he was the one who had the bile coming out of his teeth, almost, with being so vengeful against it and so pissed off at what had happened. And we can put some songs in the show notes that exemplify that, but to give you a clearer example from much more modern times, these things like personal circumstances do come out in metal all the time. It's not just these big and dark and horrible themes. I remember a few years ago a band called Machine Head, who were more recent. They started in the
I've heard of them. I'm just this is what I'm going to feel occasionally as
you'll be getting a Blue Peter badge after this.
As long as there's not a quiz.
In Machine Head there was a particular band, two band members who were having a feud. One was the lead member, Rob Flynn, another was the bassist, and they had this argument. The bassist ended up leaving. It turned into a big legal battle, and these were guys who had been together for a long time as friends in the band, outside the band. It was almost like family, and all of a sudden this professional divide had come between them like a hot knife through butter and just killed the relationship dead.
Right.
Machine Head kept going in the absence of the bassist. They hired a new guy who came in and filled the slot and did it really well. But after that spat, they had a song on their next album called Game Over, and the song Game Over was all about this relationship that had just died the most horrible death after being so promising. And that, for me, because of that story that was behind it, and you could see all of that stuff in the papers, you could then listen to the song in parallel and just feel that this guy was crying writing the song. And it's things like that, and metal or any other music, like when you hear it you think, this is more than just a song. This is, as Rob Flynn himself has said on stage, this is therapy. This is a way to express this shitstorm that has happened, put it in words, get it out there, get it out of my head into a song, thrust through a microphone and out to a crowd who might have had similar experiences. And it's that sort of thing that makes, for me, it was metal. It might be something else to other people, but for me, in metal, it was things like that, going beyond the big themes to the personal stories, that made it something that you could connect with and see that these folks were really thinking about different things to write about for themselves and then for other people.
It's ridiculous that I'm this age and I'm discovering this, because you sort of picture, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but that metal songs are heavy and loud. That's the rule. It's heavy and loud. So how can something heavy and loud be emotional? How can something heavy and loud be written through tears? Like, I'm sitting here going, like, I can't picture, like, for example, I went to see Paul Simon recently, and there's the moments where the band goes off and he's left with his guitar and it's just him, and it's a lovely, gentle moment. I can't imagine the moment where the monsters on the stage fade back and one single light falls on an acoustic guitar and he plays this emotional song about losing his friend.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need that change of scenery for it to be an emotional song, but I just hadn't considered, to me, heavy metal was loud, it was angry, it was fast. It may have been angry at a situation, but it wasn't pitiful or sorrowful, maybe.
Well, you know, those songs that are personal and sad and, you know, about these things that you've lost, they don't all need to be with one person and an acoustic guitar. Many of the best songs are. Man, think about it, when you are a teenager or the problems that you've had now, everyone gets pissed off, everyone gets angry, everyone wants to bang their head against the wall, everyone wants to scream bloody murder sometimes. And some of those things that are, you know, the problems in our life are best said in songs that are a little bit louder, a little bit heavier, a little bit more machine gun-esque in terms of the scattergun type approach to the beats in the songs. That's why I mentioned it being a sort of therapy, because whether or not the song itself relates to exactly what you're feeling, it's the feeling of the music itself. Think about any movie we've ever watched, man. If you take the music out of the movie, it's a completely different experience, right? Metal for me was the way of, and it is for many people, that's why it's more of a, metal's not just music, metal's a way of life for many people. And you see that in the sort of people that go to the Cat House, that go along to the gigs. This is a way to get all of that shit out of your head that requires and is best serviced by loud music that you can enjoy, and it seems angry but you're enjoying it with your friends, and it's helping you get over something.
You literally have said the statement that was in my head there.
What was that?
Would you say metal's a way of life for you?
Yeah.
Because, and again, this is judgmental, but honest. To look at you, you wouldn't say you're a metalhead, if that's still a phrase. Like when people talk about metal music, you get your image of the Cat House. Those of you who haven't been to the Cat House, it's a big dark room full of long hair and black clothes and a fair amount of leather. It's a mix between what used to be the back of Borders where the goths hang out and just full on noise. But I know you wear metal t-shirts, I know you had a famous leather jacket, but I wouldn't have thought that metal was a way of life for you. So it's interesting to hear you talk about all this, and then you would say it completely is. Is there something like that sets you apart, makes you not grow your hair, not have that metal attitude to life? Because I'd say there can be a perceived attitude of angry at the world. Maybe the answer is you're not a teenager anymore, but I don't think you ever had that or never showed that through your time with us. But maybe you were a closet, you had a wig at home or something like that you used to put on the moment you got home, you would thrash in your room. Was that ever a consideration for you, going full out on the look, big leather boots, long hair, any of that?
I think it's all part of a spectrum. When I say it's a way of life, it's because of everything I mentioned with regards to how I see and hear the music and what it does for me. When I was first getting into it, back when I was 14, as we started, and 15, 16, it was about trying the music, but it was about trying the look as well. I had tons of baggy jeans. I had grey, black, blue baggy jeans. I had a wallet with the chain hanging out. Excellent. I had the big, thick skater shoes like DC.
And Vans,
and Vans and things like that. And everything in between. I had the hoodies that were 3 sizes too big for me. I tried to grow my hair, but the easy answer to that is I can't grow a mane of hair like many guys could. I might have tried that if I could. But I was experimenting with all of that, and I found a place that was comfortable for me. Some people go all in to the extreme ends of the scale and beyond, but that wasn't for me, and that's fine. But here's the thing, in the community of people who like metal music, and the community I mean people who go to rock bars, people who go to clubs like the Cat House, people who go along to metal gigs, there is, I'm trying not to generalise too much, but there is this feeling of tolerance everywhere. Everyone is really, really relaxed. You could be there in bright white makeup with black around your eyes and red in your teeth, with a long leather jacket like Neo from The Matrix. And that would be completely fine next to someone who's just rocked up out of work in their suit and tie, and they're just there to listen to the same music.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what they're there for, and no one plainly gives a shit about what you're doing, what you look like. And I think for a lot of people, you'll find that if you ask them why they're into metal music, it's because that's the place where they belonged.
Yeah.
That's, you know, I mean, back to the teenage thing yet again. You know, for a lot of people who perhaps went fuller into it, is because for them, that's where they found they belonged. They weren't the cool kids in school. They weren't the jocks. They weren't the people who were going to be the most popular. They might have been some of the people who were bullied, and they were looking for an outlet. They were looking for friends, or they were looking for a way to express how they were feeling. And that's where they found it.
That makes total sense. I've been to the Cat House. It has a stigma around it, a stigma which I know I'm already showing in the questions that I'm asking through my naivety. But when you go into the Cat House, there is all walks of life, and no one does bat an eye. If anything, I'm the one batting an eye, like, why are they here? But really the answer is, why am I there, when it comes down to it. So I feel we've got away from the music, which is what we're here to talk about. We have Metallica as your entry point. Are there any other bands like that you would... Because I assume that you don't just listen to Metallica. Are there other bands that are maybe well known that I would actually go, oh yeah, I've heard that before? Or is there, like you said, your big four already? I feel I'm out. You've mentioned one or two since then. But even that, you mentioned Motley Crue and Def Leppard in a conversation on Hair and Glam Rock. I was like, oh, I didn't know they counted as that. Who do you listen to on a daily basis, for example? What if I looked on your last played in Spotify, next to ABBA, what would be there?
Well spotted. Another one in this sort of realm that I would bet that you would know is Motorhead.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And interestingly, back to the pigeonholing thing, Lemmy of Motorhead, may he rest in peace, was famous for saying, we're not metal, we're just doing rock and roll, man. And you know, he was the most consistent character in all of this scene. Anyone who knows Lemmy knows him as the guy who lived fast and did not die young. You know, he was all in on being a rock and roll character. He's probably got, not to say this is a good thing, but he's probably had more kids than we've had hot dinners. He's drank more Jack Daniels than anyone's had water. He was the person who almost defied the natural course of things to do what he did. But getting away from it, the pigeonholing thing, they weren't so concerned about pigeonholing themselves. They were influenced by blues metal and things like, blues rock and things like that, and done their own thing. Some of it was bluesy, some of it sort of tickled the realms of heavy metal. But they're another band that played fast, played heavy, played loud, that you would know, and is in that sort of realm. One of the most famous songs in all of rock or metal is Ace of Spades. And another discovery in terms of me being young and hearing this band is Motorhead came out of the UK. They were another one of these UK delights that graced the metal and the rock scene. And I first heard Motorhead not in a gig, not in a CD, but on a TV show called The Young Ones.
Oh, of course, yes.
Remember The Young Ones?
Famous episodes with them in it, yes.
Yeah, so
oh wow.
Famous British sitcom, and this sitcom was innovative in its own right, a conversation for another day. But one of the things that they did that was quite different was they would have real bands playing out some of the scenes in the show.
Madness, like in the garden and things like that.
Exactly. So Madness were featured, and Motorhead were featured in there as well. I was like, my God, who is this guy with the massive mane of long hair and this beard that covers his entire face? And they're playing with a loudness that I didn't know was possible, and it was, again, you see the signatures of things of, I want to get into that. It's loud, it's heavy,
it's cool,
it's different, it's cool, these guys are going for it. And they had a look about them as well, you know. They had Lemmy, you know, for all the way he was, he didn't give a crap about anything or what anyone thought. This was a guy who would happily wear a black shirt, a Stetson, cowboy boots, and everything else black. You know, that was his look. Sunglasses just for good measure. So in terms of bringing a theme around all of this, you say we're getting away from it by not talking about the music all the time, but for me, talking about metal is talking about all of these other things.
Yes.
It's a whole part of it, and that's what I love about it so much. It is the look, it is the music, it is the attitude.
Yeah.
It's how these guys play themselves out.
So one thing that you've mentioned loads so far is I assumed through images of Lemmy and through an unfamiliarity that most of these bands were American. Everyone you've mentioned so far has been like from Middle England sort of thing, but this idea, and it's as basic as that band on The Young Ones, guys got a Stetson. Who wears Stetsons? The Americans do. And I would have assumed constantly that all these people, and I've seen concert footage and they're shouting to the crowd and all that, but I'm taking, like, for example, I know Kiss are American. They sing about Detroit all the time. Like, that's a giveaway. I assumed most of the bands, because they've got, maybe it is a sort of Springsteen link, they've got this longevity to them.
Yes.
They've been around for 30, 40 years, and some who I'm just discovering have been around for that amount of time. But they have this, like, the British style is so different to metal, I would say. And I think of America, which has this vastness, that I'd assumed all these bands have come here from there.
Yeah.
Because they're doing beyond arena tours, stadium tours around the world, and no, that's not a British thing. I don't know why I think that.
Yeah.
Are there any American bands then? Because it seems to everyone you've mentioned, it seems to me, pretty much have been British so far.
Yeah, there's loads of them, and I can mention a few of them. My mate Mikey that we started this whole story with, he's a guy who's really great at discovering new bands, and a lot of what he listens to is from America. So there's a band, Tool, from California in America. I've mentioned Machine Head already, they're from America.
Right.
Of course, Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Slayer, they're all from America.
Are they? You just said they were from...
Who did I say?
Metallica, Megadeth.
Megadeth, they're all from America.
I am.
Motorhead
right,
is...
So Iron Maiden are British, that's what, so I got confused, apologies here.
Iron Maiden from the UK, Motorhead from the UK.
So this is where I'm getting this, where I've grown up with this. Okay,
Yeah.
so these bands are American. Okay, I got confused by a new wave of British metal.
I think
Okay. That's where I got lost here.
So to
Interesting, right,
recap on that new wave of British heavy metal, we were talking about Iron Maiden for that. This is a good point then to go back to the origin of metal as anyone knows it, and that is in the UK.
Okay.
So if you go away from this with one thing, it's that it started in the UK. The band that started it all, another one that I'm sure you'll know, from Birmingham, Black Sabbath.
Fair, right, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So Ozzy Osbourne and the crew from Birmingham didn't have two pennies to rub together, working in steelworks and various laborious menial jobs, could barely put socks on their feet. Those were guys who in the late 60s into the 70s and indeed still going now for the most part, those are the guys who first picked up guitars and turned the gain up, so made them sound not very clean but crunchy.
Okay.
Almost put a muffled sound to them, and we can hear some of that soon if you like, but it was this different, heavier, grittier sound that no one had really put in a guitar before. And I've mentioned a few times about different storytelling and putting heavier themes on things. Black Sabbath were trying that at a time where as soon as they did it, it was heretical. These were guys who were reading and watching horrors, and they thought, why not make a song that sounds scary? And when they did that, you know, in a culture that was still quite conservative post-war, still quite religious in nature, you had a lot of people batting against them, you had a lot of people protesting against that sort of music, thinking it was corrupting children. And of course, if the parents don't like it, the best marketing tool in the world, the kids are going to love it. And that's what skyrocketed them, and every single metal band after Black Sabbath is influenced by Black Sabbath.
But they are, and it's all at the same time, they're essentially the Beatles of metal then, would you say? Is that like a safe bet? Precisely. Which is probably an insult to Black Sabbath. They're the Black Sabbath of heavy metal, they probably want to say, but...
No, because again, if you watch interviews and you see these guys, then yes, they've got egos, all rock stars do, but there's not that immediacy about it. It's, you know, guys getting on with doing exactly what they love. In fact, you know, these are guys that are such avid music lovers, as they'll talk all day about the people that influenced them.
Yeah.
And in documentaries with Black Sabbath, you'll see that a lot of what they started playing was blues.
Okay.
You know, blues rock, which was a thing of old.
Yeah.
But that's the stuff that got them kick-started before they started.
Get them into working men's clubs, will get them doing gigs, getting them their money. Fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. So all of these bands have strings to their bow, origins that emerge from what people would pigeonhole as a completely different type of music. But you can't get these new things like metal without coming from blues, without coming from elements of jazz and maybe even country in some spaces as well. And in the case of bands like Yes from the 70s, progressive rock bands, and even Metallica, as we've mentioned many times already, classical music is a massive influence on this area because they're longer, they've got multiple parts to them, they're thematic, they're operatic, they're epic. All these influences come in and create these new styles of music.
It is marvellous. So to jump from the beginnings to now, for example, are there, like, you recently went to see Iron Maiden?
I did, yes.
They're still touring. Are they still releasing music, or are they kind of Rolling Stonesing it and just making money off what they've done?
2 albums ago, back in 2011, Iron Maiden had an album titled The Final Frontier.
Right.
At this point they're in their mid-50s, they've gone around the world 100 times, they've proven themselves to no end. They could have cashed in there, and throughout that tour they were going on stage saying, this album is not doing what it says in the tin, this is not the end as you think it is. They've done another album since then, and now they're touring that album and doing a sort of anthology of everything that's gone before, but they've still got they've still got fuel in them, they're still going to release more music. One of the band members, the founding band member, has a band in the UK called British Line that he plays with. So these guys are still exploring music, they're still creating music, they're doing it.
Are British Line a metal band, or are they a different genre or a different style?
Rock and metal, I haven't listened to them so much. I know of them, but I haven't heard much about them.
When you're saying they still have the fuel to do it, is it as good? Do you think today's albums are standing up to the albums of old? This is a band who've been around for 40 years. Are they as good? Are there peaks and troughs? I mean, everyone has peaks and troughs, but are there albums you go, oh God, we don't listen to 95 to 2004, that's just not a time we talk about? Or the recent ones you sit and listen and go, oh, just stop, please, just run on your anthology? Or is it still as good?
Well, there's still a lot of cracking stuff coming out, and this is where I keep coming back to the story behind it as well. It's not just that you get songs that are good or even better than some earlier stuff. It's stories like the fact that the lead singer of Iron Maiden, Bruce Dickinson, at the time of the last album, pushing his late 50s, had contracted mouth cancer as they were recording that album. And then you listen to the album and the songs are great, and you hear this guy with a massive operatic, massive range in voice, cracking out these songs, and he did it while he had mouth cancer. And you think, that's stoicism for you. That's a guy who knows how good he's got it, and he's going to get on with the bloody job and do a good job of it. When you mention things like other periods where you didn't listen to them, a band like Iron Maiden and some others, Iron Maiden most notably, went through a period where one of their hurdles was the fact that Bruce Dickinson, the guy I've just mentioned, and some of the other band members fell out. Bruce Dickinson left and wanted to do solo stuff for a while. So they brought in another singer, a guy called Blaze Bayley, who was big on the scene in the 90s, another guy who had a great voice. The 2 albums that they released in the 90s with him are more or less seen as the sort of weaker albums from the band. Some good songs on there, but in terms of a consistent piece of 8, 9, 10 songs, not as great as some of the other stuff.
When they play today, do they still play those songs with Dickinson's voice? do you notice that? Like, do you notice them going, oh, they're playing that, and do you think this is better with him? Is that a thing?
We'll go one better than that. Iron Maiden started with a different singer,
Okay.
Paul Di'Anno, and he was another guy who was sort of frayed at the edges, loose on the scene, a loose cannon. And after the first 2 albums, this was a band like Metallica who had massive ambitions and wanted to go places and wanted to get out into the world. And to do that, to get beyond the first 2 albums, which were well received, to go stratospheric, Steve Harris, the leader of the band, thought, we need to bring someone else in. We need someone who can do things with their voice, that can perform the songs that we are writing and do it better than Paul's doing it. So they got rid of him, and it was only on the 3rd album for Iron Maiden that they brought in Bruce Dickinson.
Okay.
This is something else you might know. The 3rd album was called The Number of the Beast.
Yep.
And it had the song with that title on it as well. And that, in terms of Iron Maiden legacy, is one of the most successful albums that a metal band has ever released.
Okay.
It's got some absolute classics on it. One song which you've mentioned already earlier,
Run to the Hills,
Run to the Hills, is on that album.
So these are songs that I know from my brother, who is 5 years older than me, I believe.
Yeah.
Who's not a metal guy, although in saying that, in high school he had the long hair, he had the bracelets, he had...
Yeah.
I don't know if he had the band t-shirts, but I remember him, for example, going to see Pantera. And I didn't know what a Pantera was. I've got a Pantera plectrum somewhere from this guy. And all I remember is him going out with his hair, which was down his back to this point, and a million wee baubles to keep it up.
Yes.
And I'm coming back the next day with none left. And he was like, oh, I went crowd surfing, and I was just like, holy shit, crowd surfing's real, you've done it, you're so hardcore. I think he caught a drumstick as well. I was like, this is bananas, this is rock and roll. But through him, I actually got into video games and then downloading music.
Yeah.
But a video game I remember is Carmageddon. Have you ever played Carmageddon?
Yes, I've
Kind of bald guy in a red car,
Yeah.
smashing up pedestrians basically. But I can't remember if the music in Carmageddon was this, or whether it was through Winamp, which was a kind of pre-iTunes thing that we had in our computer, and it was full of Chris's music, my brother's music, and it was Run to the Hills, Number of the Beast.
Yeah.
That level of stuff was on there, mixed in with like some Beatles stuff, some random American, like Presidents of the USA were on there. We kind of just T-Rex things, so I could probably sit and sing a lot of Number of the Beast, but in my head I'm like sitting imagining a WASD keyboard to drive my car, and you know, these buttons are my weapons, and that's what, and I as I'm talking I'm picturing the wee bedroom at Mum's house, because that's where the computer used to be, and that's what these memories of these songs give me. So it's a totally different, whereas you were moshing in the cat house, I was sitting playing computer games to the same music. But it was these, he's probably similar to me, it's these mainstream hits, the ones that escape the metal world and get out, because it's the biggest selling album of all time in the metal. It's a massive hit in the metal world, so it seeps into mainstream society. And he also attended the Key, so those music influences were coming to him. He was cherry picking, and I got the scraps of that. So it was interesting to hear, because these are the songs that I base everything I know about. So when I'm asking, what do you mean these metal bands can write emotional songs? The song I know is about the devil, just the devil, and how I assume great the devil is. And then you hit home with those parents hate it. Are they Satanists? Is it evil? Why is Satan on their thing? Why do they have massive inflatable Satans at their shows and things like that?
There's another great story in that you've mentioned it there, about that satanic edge and the fear that parents would have had when this music first came out. One of the best examples of that being used as a play is by a guy called Shep Gordon. There's an absolutely amazing documentary that folks should check out called Supermensch. Supermensch is the name for someone who is, I'm probably getting this a little bit wrong, but it's a great person who helps everyone else and connects everyone else. Shep Gordon was a Jewish guy who turned up in either LA, Beverly Hills, somewhere like that in the US in the 60s. He met Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix said to him, "You're Jewish, you should be a manager."
Right.
He became Jimi Hendrix's manager.
One way of doing it,
Yeah.
smashing.
But through many people like that he knew in the industry, he eventually came across this guy called Alice Cooper.
Okay, it's amazing we've got this far before mentioning him. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Alice Cooper, as you may know from how he looks now, this is a guy who's been around for a long time. He's had longevity, but he's got these black eyes that look as if they're falling down around his face with the makeup that he's got, and then he's got black makeup that comes out from the edges of his lips to make it look as if he's got this massive maniacal frown. And he wears these black clothes. He, like Iron Maiden, has a really, really theatrical set as part of his music. But this relationship between him and Shep Gordon was one of marketing genius.
Okay.
This was the story that really started that thing of, here's music that the parents are going to hate, but because they hate it, the kids are going to fucking love it. And there's a great story from when they started their relationship, manager and artist. Before Alice Cooper got really big, he and his band, they played a show one night where Alice was dressed in a suit. He had nothing under the suit. The suit was transparent. So when he started the show, it looked as if he was bollock naked on the stage, playing his show, kids liking the songs. Some parent gets wind of it, the police get wind of it, they turn up. But by the time the police turn up, the show's gone on long enough that it's got so hot in the room that Alice is sort of sweating and transpiring and the suit becomes cloudy.
Brilliant.
So you can't see anything anymore. So the police are like, what the hell's going on? They can't do anything.
Fantastic.
They don't arrest them or anything, and they leave. But the real kicker to that was what Shep did, which was then try to get that as widely publicised as possible. Get it in the newspapers, get it out there, get people talking, because the next time Alice has a show, more people want to know what this crazy guy is doing.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of thing, that relationship, that realisation that this big group of people are going to hate it, but this other group of people are going to love it. That was something that really clicked early on. So you might hear someone like Alice Cooper being related to metal, but he was a guy that started in the late 60s, early 70s, around the time that Black Sabbath were starting out, and people wouldn't have pigeonholed it as metal back then. It was another term you might hear is shock rock.
Okay, yeah.
You know, more of that could have merged early on because there was more things to be shocked about. And he was one of the early proprietors of that sort of thing.
So in terms of your top, I don't know, your not top 5 artists and stuff, do you tend to prefer these when you go to a concert? Do you prefer a theatrical show or a musical focus?
That's a tough one. They are both memorable for very different reasons. The Iron Maiden stuff, to stick with that, that's memorable because the songs are good, but the show is even better. The stuff like Metallica and Megadeth, which are less epic in terms of the setup of the stage, they're memorable because you're singing along to the lyrics of all of these songs that have really quite epic stories and deep matter to talk about. You've made me think about it more than I normally do, but I have said this in other terms, which is when I talk about bands like Iron Maiden and another band we haven't spoken about, Rammstein from Germany. When I talk about them, I'm now consciously remembering that I talk about them as being the most entertaining gigs that I've been
that
to.
word being
Yes, because they have been the bands that I've had, you know, in the case of Iron Maiden, big monsters, and Eddie, their sort of mascot, the sort of zombie-like creature that is a theme in all the Iron Maiden covers. You know, he comes out in various guises on the stage, and they'll have, for example, the gig that we went to in Aberdeen, the first song was called Aces High, a song about fighter aeroplanes and the blitzing,
Okay.
the wars of the skies,
Uh-huh.
essentially. And so when that song starts, it starts with a riff that everyone knows, but when it kicks into the main part of the song, the lights come up and there's a full-scale Spitfire in the sky
Oh wow.
overhead, flying as the guys are playing the song and singing the song. And this thing is just, they are creating the scene
Oh wow.
physically
Uh-huh.
as these guys are playing it out, and we are listening to it and we're feeling it, and now we can see it. That's what Iron Maiden do. Rammstein were in the realms like Alice Cooper of shock rock and what is called nu metal, which we can talk about later. But the guys who came into Rammstein were all people who were trained pyrotechnics.
Okay.
So these are guys who knew how to play with fire,
Uh-huh.
who knew how to set off fireworks, and for the most part, no one would get injured by it. So they, when I went to see Rammstein in 2005, it was a memorable enough show that I remember that it was 2005.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything like that anymore. And that was the first time, the only time I've ever seen someone playing guitar in a band and sparkler like fireworks shooting out the end of the guitar, and then
Okay.
fireworks going off at different beats in the song, and the one going bang, 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 and you can
Wow.
feel the heat hitting you.
Uh-huh.
I still remember that clearly. There's 100 other gigs I've been to that I probably don't remember 2 songs that were played in a row.
Yeah.
And to
Wow.
end that part of it, like the last thing it makes me think of is something I mentioned last time we sat down. And it's a quote I always come back to, whether it's talking about reading or writing or someone speaking or someone playing a song. Doesn't matter what you say or do. At the end of the day, people won't remember what you've said or what you've done.
Yeah.
People will remember how you made them feel. And it's that sort of stuff in the theatre side of it that makes you remember it. You remember how you feel when you
Yes.
saw that for the first time.
Completely.
And on the other side, for the guys that don't do the theatrical stuff, you're remembering how you feel because you're ingrained in the music, you're ingrained in the subject matter, you're singing along to every lyric. In the case of Metallica, you're there singing along, remembering that first time that you were in the cat house, remembering that first time that you were flicking through the albums, remembering that first time that you took the sleeve out of the CD and started studying all of those lyrics and discovering what the songs were about.
Uh-huh.
That's the sort of thing that you feel and remember and take away from it.
Uh-huh.
So again, that you're leading into, or you're saying the things that I'm thinking at these points here now. With Bruce Springsteen, he sings a lot about young love, teenage love, and life as a working man, which has really come out in life. He never really was a working one, quite way we imagine him being, so blue collar. Or Paul Simon's kind of young discovery, or the Arctic Monkeys, drinking with your pals at 19 and 20 kind of stories. I don't know how much of a war enthusiast you are or an insanity enthusiast you are, but you've talked about how some of these songs have emotional meanings and their stories behind them, which I definitely is what's intriguing me and wanting to draw me in. Do you ever struggle? You talked about an opening song being about Spitfires fighting in the sky.
Yeah.
I picked that being quite interesting and quite cool.
Yeah.
I know that's not for everyone, but also I don't think I could listen to a whole album about dogfights or the trenches.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought, or kind of maybe preferred certain songs because they are, you listen to an album and be like, that's a bit too war-y for me, or like, oh, there's not enough fighting in that one? Do you have, with artists or bands or albums, penchants for the story behind it, like that's too historical or that's too impersonal for you? Just is that a thing that you find you come across, you listen to a song, then you sort of turn like, I don't know what he's talking about. Like, I don't know what a Spitfire is. I don't know what the link is here.
Not often. When I'm listening to metal, another thing that got me into it was these tended to be folks that were playing with intricacy. They were really, as I've mentioned already, influenced by a lot of classical musicians, classical influences. So there was intricacy and complicated music to play, and the songs that I always like are the songs that can marry that with a nice way of singing the lyrics or getting the lyrics across, that it made sense to sing them at that point in the song.
Okay.
Sometimes, for example, you'll have songs where it's got a title and the chorus of that song is sing the title, sing the title, sing the title, sing the title, and it just doesn't feel in any way clever. It doesn't feel in any way as if it fits. It's been shoehorned in there. That's the sort of stuff that I look at and think, okay, I can't really be bothered with that. And then it's the other songs where it does that a lot better, or even the songs that have a title that doesn't appear in the song at all.
Yes.
And you can see why that's the case. That's the sort of stuff that sticks in my mind. It might not be the case for other people, but it's, I guess in a nutshell, it's when you see signs of some laziness in songs, I think, where it is just certain things are shoehorned in that turns you off to it.
On that link, this is going to be a bit of a jump, because I imagine you'll like this. In terms of these bands, are there instrumentals, versus songs with lyrics? Do you have a preference either way, or do you notice that this song didn't need lyrics, or you sat after a while going, I wish this was a song rather than a tune?
The ones that I've heard, songs versus instrumentals, for the most part I've thought that they are in the right place. Many metal songs will have long stretches where they are just instrumental.
Okay.
And those are great and they're in the right place and they do not need lyrics. The lyrics have been sang already. Now this is the epic crescendo to the song. One that springs to mind immediately is it's called One by Metallica.
I know that one.
And that's about 8 minutes long roughly. First 4 minutes is build up, some acoustics mixed with heavier chorus, a lot of singing. The next 4 minutes is just all crashing guitar and crescendo to the song's end and the song's climax. And it was listening to metal where that heaviness was married for the first time with complete tracks, as you've mentioned, that were instrumental that didn't have any lyrics at all, and that at this beginning blew me away. And this will probably come up as some part of our conversation, because one of the ones that stuck with me and still sticks with me is from that very first Metallica album that I got, Master of Puppets. It was called Orion, and it had a great stretch of music in that I learned to play eventually, that I love and love for many, many reasons. But people who are not invested in that will see a guy dressed as Elvis playing guitar for 5 minutes straight and thinking, what the hell is going on? Anyone listening to this is thinking, why the hell have I mentioned Elvis?
So this is going to lead beautifully into what is next. One of the first times, so you mentioned earlier around about 14, 15 you weren't playing music yet. But we've alluded to many times that you do. And the first time I experienced this was a Halloween party at my home, and through the marvels that we've already mentioned of my mother, she's a traditionalist, so it was a Halloween party, so everyone, I almost said turns a trick, but we didn't have any prostitutes. Everyone does a trick, it's a trick or treat, and my mum's very much like, you can tell a joke if you want, but really, I'm looking for a talent. So I'd pre-warned everyone, because we were 16, 17. I like to think we were. For the purposes of this story, at one point, Marc will be 18, just think for any lawmakers listening in. But we were watching basically spending our evening watching people perform. And this was a small living room in East Kilbride. There was about probably 15 of us crammed in there. I remember one of our friends, Stephen, juggled, dressed as Charlie Chaplin. That was highly entertaining. Myself and a friend, Paul, recited a poem about dogs that we'd made up on the way to school one day. You don't remember that, do you? Yeah, nobody does. I could recite it right now for you. It's so ingrained in myself and Paul's heads. Another song, turn that I remember was our two friends at the time, Ross and Paul, singing a song dressed as Slash and Adamant, but singing a ridiculously poppy song about going to the door and receiving post from a lover or something. And then Elvis stands up. Elvis, dressed as Marc Reed, stands up and lifts his guitar. And I'm fairly certain, was it your guitar you brought and everyone was using your guitar to play? I think the very guitar that's in the room right now. So he gets up and he's like, right, I'm going to play a song. And we're all sitting and from the kind of conversation you might have guessed, a bit of an eclectic mix of people, but topped off with my, at this time, 50-year-old mother, probably my 20-year-old sister and her pal, and a group of teenagers, and Elvis proceeds to play what is now a famous 7-minute Slayer solo with no singing. He just stood and played, and it's so impressive. Slayer, I didn't know who they were. The song was Slither, I believe. Was it not?
No, you've got it all.
Oh man,
It was the Metallica track that I mentioned.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, I've always had it down as Slither. Was Slither the house party you had? There was music. Slither stands out to me, and it's the only Slayer song I know.
There's patches of music here,
Okay.
but
So Orion was the song you were playing, but regardless,
Yes.
I didn't know what you were playing. I've just found out, and I was very impressed. I mean, I knew Marc very well, and he's playing guitar. This is really, really good. This is still good. It would be rude to refill my drink right now.
it did go on.
And it did, and it was not to downplay your talents, but we were just, and it's been brought up many times since then as a pivotal moment in our, holy shit, this guy can play guitar for a long time. What is your version of that story then? What is from your perspective? Not to, I mean, it's hopefully you can take this lag this many years on.
Oh yeah.
My version of the question is what possessed you to play that, but what was going through your mind at the time?
Looking back, I'm thinking, my God, why did I play that? And
I'm glad.
I justify it partly by the fact that you've already mentioned that we were still in our teenage years. This was a few years after the fire had been lit with finding out about these bands, learning these songs. And that one that I played was something that, in my head at the time, it took me a really long time to learn how to play it. It had come off of that first Metallica album that was ingrained in my soul.
Watching your face justify this is fantastic. It really is.
It's bringing a tear to my eye, Mark. But what I didn't realise at the time is because I'd been so in depth in getting into this sort of music, it had become the norm for me to have these slightly longer songs, longer than 4 minutes, 5, 6, 7 minute songs. They were in multiple parts with several layers of guitar and drums playing in them. And that for me was what I was finding out about. That was normal. That was back at the time when I didn't know my audience. Mm-hmm. I was getting into that, and God damn it, everyone else was going to get into it at the same time. I was immersed in it, and I didn't. Do you know, looking back, I can vaguely remember standing there with what is a jet black jagged guitar, stereotypical of the metal scene, and I was standing looking down at the guitar, being so careful about how I was playing the notes, where my fingers were placed on the fretboard, when I was timing things and making sure it sounded good, that I forgot how damn long I was up there playing for.
Yeah. And the argument now, and I haven't thought about this moment sympathetically ever, I've always looked on it objectively, but realistically,
so you should.
We speak of a time 3 years ago at this point, you weren't playing guitar, and now you're able to play that.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You've learnt this piece.
Yeah.
You've learnt this piece, so no one would ask you to play half a song. So you're playing the whole song, so it does totally make sense from your point of view. And you're right, if that had been a different audience, that would have gone down an absolute storm. And it has gone down a storm in our social circle, just not in the way you wanted it to.
Yeah. It has longevity for all the wrong reasons.
So at what point, jumping back and forth so frequently here, between 14, between finding Master of Puppets and drowning your sorrows in a bottle of red wine after that song, tune, do you call it a song or a tune? What's it called?
An instrumental.
So would you say, oh, that instrumental track 5's great, or would you still say, oh, song 5's quite good?
See, that's the thing that's dying out as well, because you're talking in CD speak. Back when you throw a CD into the hi-fi or the car.
It's on side 2.
Yeah, exactly. I never really did that. I was more about the names of the songs.
But even that, you're saying songs, because I suppose it's under an umbrella, isn't it, of songs on an album. It's not instrumentals on an album. Okay. So what point did you learn to play guitar and why, I suppose?
We circle back to the beginning again, and
Black Sabbath, here he comes.
no, the beginning of the story in terms of where it started for me and Mikey, for that first time that we walked up those steps to the cat house
Okay.
and heard the machine gun scatter of Metallica and Master of Puppets playing. It's when we heard this music that we couldn't really conceptualise as being played only by chords, or three chords that make up a simple song. There was deeper stuff going on here. We had to find out more. And I can't remember exactly how we got on to this guy, but the school that Mikey went to and later the high school that he would attend, there was a music teacher associated with it, a freelance guy called David Pierce.
Okay.
I think there's a DJ called David Pierce as well. This guy David Pierce, Mikey's mum knew him from school, and he was a freelance guitar teacher, and eventually we arranged for Mikey and I to have one guitar lesson per week together.
Okay.
With this guy Dave Pierce, an amazing guitarist who had a lot of patience for us.
Now you say Dave Pierce, I'm going, yes, he was right, okay.
Pierce, yes. So yeah, we started off playing guitar. We both managed to source guitars. We both had guitars bought for us by our parents, thankfully, because we had heard this music and we wanted to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
That happened probably a month after that episode in the cat house. We had to do it. Yeah. It's been a long time since I thought about that, but I'm really glad you brought it up, because playing music and that side of this thing is one of the shining experiences that's come out of the whole metal thing.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone out there is looking to get into playing an instrument or doing anything like that, all I can say is give it a bloody try. If you can find a way to do it, if you can get a hold of the instrument that you want to play, get it. And I think nowadays it's even easier to do, because as long as you can get a hold of the instrument you want, as long as you've got an internet connection, you can start to educate yourself. But for us, it was great to have that teacher there, and it was great because not only did we have a teacher who was great at being patient and showing us what we wanted to learn, but we were doing it as a pair.
Yes.
And I remember the likes of our friends Tam and Ross Bapty and Sanj. Once upon a time they all went to guitar lessons together. Maybe Paul as well, but I can't remember, I might be mistaken. Kenny, yes, thank you. So they were all, at least a subset of them were going to guitar lessons together, and I'm sure they can recount many good stories, but doing something like that as part of a pair or a small group made it really, really enjoyable. And that comes back to some of our school friends later, because the fact that we were doing it as a pair was great, because again we were on that same journey of not just discovering these songs, but finding out the anatomy of those songs. How the hell do those guys make that sound? So we were doing that, but we were also then able to figure out if these songs are like a lasagna and they've got multiple layers of stuff going on to make something that's greater than the sum of its parts, why don't I play this part and you play this other part?
Okay.
And the experience that come out of that is you hear not just yourself playing this music, but you hear the harmonies that come out of playing together, and that is absolutely amazing.
You're making music, one person playing is fine, but when there's two, you're making music.
And for us, for you and I and our legacy together, that came around when we started to go to rehearsal studios like Jinx.
Yes,
So when we would get together in groups of 5 or 6, we would have a drummer, a bassist, several guitarists, and a couple of guys who wanted to get on the microphone and sing. And you'll remember clearly that not all the time we were going in to play a song that we knew.
Yes.
We would be going in to watch someone play a riff, and then someone else would join in. Someone else might make up some lyrics, and a drum beat would get going, and then the magic starts. That's amazing. But yeah, it all started with those guitar lessons, and then eventually, later on, after a few years, when high school started to get busier and exams rolled around, we stopped the lessons, but I kept going. We kept finding examples of songs to play, tabs or music that we could find on the internet, and playing along with the songs. So listening to them play out on the stereo, and then playing parts of the music, and then going back and playing again, going back and playing again, and slowly but surely learning how to do it.
Right, we've talked about it enough. Pick it up.
Let's do it.
So there's a few things I want to kind of hark back to, which to kind of make links. So the first thing I want to ask that's stuck in my head as you get yourself prepared is when Ozzy Osbourne picked up a guitar and he turned up the gain. Now that's a word I've seen to do with music and sound.
Yes.
That's my knowledge of gain. I've seen it. Could you give me an example of what this would be like?
Yes, so I've now adjusted myself. I have that black jagged guitar on my lap. So I've got my effects pedal here. This was another thing that when I started getting guitars, this was a thing that I saw in Merchant City Music in Glasgow, and it sat in the glass in that shop, and I wanted it for years, and eventually was able to get it, but it stayed with me ever since. And to answer your question, this is something that you can change the style and the sound of the guitar simply by plugging in different little programs on this pedal.
Okay.
You go to one part of it, it'll sound like something, you go to another part, it'll sound like something completely different.
Yeah.
And with and without gain, for something that sounds very acoustic and not playing anything very interesting, it might sound like this.
Lovely. Just lovely.
But then, if we turn on the gain and make it sound crunchy and heavy, like bands like Black Sabbath did for the first time, it might sound like.
So you're beginning to see, or I'm beginning to see, like initial metals, but that's that electric guitar sound.
Yes.
Like that's that sound that you associate with long hair, bright lights. Absolutely. Straight away.
Yeah. And when we first started getting guitar lessons, that was the first time where the penny dropped. That was the first time that we went, oh my god, we've got the stuff to make that noise. So we had the guitars, we had leads that came out of the guitars, and they led into a small Marshall amp about the size of a laptop. And through that, when that was plugged in and you could hear the hiss of it without any notes being played, as soon as you struck a chord, you were all of a sudden making that noise that came out of those CDs that you were going to the store to buy. And that was amazing. In fact, I remember the very first thing that we were taught to play, we were starting out learning to play these things called power chords.
Yeah.
And those are typically 3 notes played together, which are the absolute embodiment and inner workings of a rock song.
Okay.
So let's say I could play something like a C, like a C major, nothing fancy, just a plain C chord might sound like this. But a power chord played in the key of C would sound like.
Okay.
And then that sounds really different if you put the gain on. So if I played, it might sound sort of grainy and hissy if I played the normal C chord first again.
Okay.
And now if I play the power chord, and then it starts to sound something rocky.
Yeah.
And so when we were learning to play power chords for the first time, there was 4 chords that we learned to play together that made one of the most iconic riffs from the early 90s. And ironically, this is not a metal riff, but it was one that we learned that was part of our era growing up, and it was something that gave us a flavour to learn more about stuff that we could learn in metal.
Yeah.
So those 4 chords were these. And played together like that, it doesn't sound like much. But then as you start to put a bit of rhythm to it, it sounds like this.
That's incredible.
I was sitting there, your eyes were on me as if you recognised this, and I remember I used to be in a band being in a band with a friend Kenny, and he'd do this a lot. He'd play a bit of song, and he'd be like, "Oh, you know this one?" And I'd be like, "Oh yeah," no idea. I'm like, "Shit, I'm back in Kenny's living room." Like, yeah, man, that's good, but I have no idea what you're playing. But then the moment you say a little bit of rhythm in this, it's exactly what you've heard from the CD. There's no difference there. It's incredible.
Smells Like Teen Spirit, but that was the first time that we'd learned to play these things called power chords, and it was the first time that we'd heard this sort of lion style roar coming out of an amp, that we could now make this noise ourselves.
Yes.
And I could remember it was like, you could imagine this sort of cramp being related to something else that teenage boys do, but my God, after making these finger shapes on a guitar for the first time, the next day our arms or wrists or fingers couldn't move, and it was like, my God, we've sort of contorted our arms and our fingers into these new shapes that made these incredible noises, but it's bloody sore. So it's like, you know, those times when you go back to the gym after 6 months, or you play a game of football after a few years of being away from it, it felt like that all through your arms. But slowly but surely, as time went on, we learned more songs. That became second nature. Our left hand that were playing the notes on the guitar started to become rough and calloused, whereas our right hand that was holding the plectrum remained soft, and you started to morph into the shape of someone who was playing guitar. But that's where it all started, power chords and the Nirvana.
So I'm going to put you on the spot now and take you right back to the start again.
Let's do it.
You've talked about going up the stairs to the machine gun guitar.
I did.
I don't know what the legalities of us playing 8 minutes of a Metallica song would be, but
let's play 15 seconds.
Okay, just so I can hear what. But when you say machine gun guitar, in my head I know exactly what you're talking about, but just could you give us a blast of it?
So when we were going up those stairs to the cat house, it was near the start of what I now know is the start of this song, Master of Puppets. And it was a really famous and finger-picked riff that sounds a little bit like this. So it's short notes, it's sharp notes, and it's going along at a really, really fast pace.
Yes, it is.
And when we were going up the stairs, that riff was playing, and the drums were playing along at the same pace. So when you're in that, you know, loud club environment, you hear the drums and the bass louder and in your rib cage more than anything else. And it was like, my God, there's guitar playing along with that. We need to find out what the hell's going on here. And then it gets into the main part of the song, and all those kids that I mentioned earlier are encircled around one another and singing and screaming all of these lyrics that you could hear clearly, but it all started with that machine gun riff.
And it has like it has their tails. I mean, you play a little bit of that. I know nothing as I'm going to stop saying now because you can assume from here on, but I know that's a Metallica song. I don't know Master of Puppets at all, but from the style of it, because I feel what I know, and that's probably why I know the separate bands, is they have a style like I can picture, like if you played something Iron Maiden-y, someone would go, that sounds Iron Maiden-y. And you could play it totally different. You could play different. I imagine you could take a song or just random chords and play around with stuff, but you could put it into that style because it's something that's so ingrained in you.
Yeah, so I don't know as much Iron Maiden, but there's one little bit I can play you from one of the songs we've mentioned, The Number of the Beast. And it is that same pace, it's that same speed, the same intricate finger-picked notes at a similar tempo, but it sounds quite different. So Number of the Beast starts off a little bit like this.
And it's that the drum. This is where Carmageddon's hitting me, but it's incredible that those wee bits are so telling, and I in my head I'm hearing the rest of the song, and I don't know the words that they sing, but it's not that. Is that style?
That's it, yeah.
Is there a reason, apart from maybe the speed, and that you don't know? You said straight away there, I don't know as much Iron Maiden. Is there a reason for that? Do you know? Is it?
It's probably linked to the same reasons that, you know, had I walked into the cat house and discovered Iron Maiden first rather than Metallica, I could be sitting learning 20 Iron Maiden songs rather than almost everything that Metallica's done.
Yeah.
It could have worked out that way. That's the simple reason for it. The other reason for it was I was learning from the guitar teacher, Dave Pearce, and he was teaching us some of the stuff we wanted to know from Metallica and Slayer and things, so that we could practice these intricate movements along the fretboard. And he was teaching us things from the likes of Jimi Hendrix and The Darkness and other bands of a flavour. But for me, once I got to that point, you know, for me personally, part of my character, my personality was I wanted to make some of that stuff myself.
Yeah.
So then I started writing songs, I started writing some of these instrumentals, I started writing some metal tracks. I started writing lyrics that I thought might one day be part of a band that could go on top of these tunes as well. And then later, as the years went down, I started playing and writing more acoustic songs and songs that were a little bit of a mix of both. So I think it was maybe the fact that once I got to a certain level, I wanted to explore what I could bring to the party as well.
Yeah. And what was that then? Like we talked recently about this because I knew you'd always played guitar, but I'd never known you to be in a band. Yeah. You go on jams more than anyone I know with Mikey often, and occasionally you'll put it out to the wider group of our musicians. Yeah. But then when I said about being in a band, you were like, as you said exactly what you've just said, I've written songs, I've done this, but you've never pushed it. Yeah. Is there... not I'm going to say, could you play one of your compositions for us now, Mark? But is there still that want and drive to get those songs out there? Yeah. Is metal still, is it metal you want to get out there, or is it these other ones, the more acoustic ones you just mentioned there?
I'd say both. There's parts of this conversation that could go on forever and for another time, but at the time I was writing a lot of these songs, it was me exploring it for myself. To figure out if I could do it for doing its sake. I love to be creative. That's part of the reason I went into the sort of scientific work that I do now. But at that time, in those teenage years, in those early 20s, it was probably more precious than I should have made it. Okay. Probably could have got stuff out there earlier. But now in the mindset that I'm in, you know, doing the stuff that we're doing with the podcast, learning sorts of different things, I feel this maturity about me now that I think I could easily get these songs out there. Yeah. There's certain songs, for example, which aren't all metal, but songs that I know in my head need to have a cello here, or they need to have a piano playing what I've written for guitar. So now I'm thinking, you know, when the time's right, I'm going to get someone together. I'm going to find a pianist that can do that, or a cellist that can do that. We'll pay them if we have to, we'll get folks together and we'll record them, and I know we can be able to do it. The time's just not been right for it, but a lot of these songs I've remembered, they're ingrained upstairs in my mind. Some of them I've transcribed onto paper and onto various pieces of software on the computer, so they're there, and so that's what I want to do in the future.
This is a part of it as well, like you've just said, like these things are ingrained in your mind. You've been able to just pick up that guitar and play away. If I asked you to play a Ryan, I imagine you could probably play 5 of the 7 minutes you played that night. Even as when we were getting ready for tonight, and you were just warming up on your guitar, making sure you still had it all. You went into The Darkness, I believe in a thing called Love, which is a song which was our teenage time. Justin Hawkins. I mean, I started dancing, just like doing the Jagger kind of shake and hop along, because it's these songs that are ingrained. And I remember when I started playing bass guitar, I learned Bad to the Bone because it was clearly going to be easy on a bass, and I could do that. And I then discovered that bass lines sound nothing like their songs generally, so bass was a crap instrument to play for attention, which is probably what I was doing it for. But one thing that I've always enjoyed is guitarists who can just do that one wee riff. And one thing I wait, you'll catch me in a moment with this, is when we've been at jams together, there's a moment where you've got a guitar and you turn and look at me and you play 4 or 5 notes, and it's you just, and at my next line I'd run to a microphone and shout, "Oh, you didn't know," because at some point inevitably no one's doing much, and "Oh, you didn't know," And this is exactly what, like, this is a whole different genre. We are two wrestling fans, or were wrestling fans in the 90s.
So explain to folks what you've just done.
So this was a band called a band. There you go. A tag team in WWF in the 90s called the New Age Outlaws, whose intro was the section Mark just played there, followed by the protagonist, I'm trying to call him here, the wrestler, Road Dogg, singing "Oh You Didn't Know, Your Ass Better Call Somebody," and it was a whole spoken intro, but he came out in a microphone doing it to this hard, heavy music.
Yeah.
We'd go to these jams. I'm not the most musical, I'm just there for the crack and singing along, but this was always a moment that we would have where Reedy would play that, I would get in singing, everyone could enjoy it and know what was going on, but it all just came from that da-na-na-na, which is astounding because it's, 5 or 6 notes.
Yeah.
But the moment you do that, everyone in the room's mind goes back to 1998 and watching the New Age Outlaws versus the Rock and Sock Connection or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's the power in music people talk about all the time. But it's, for someone who's not a musician, for me it's something going, man, I wish I could do that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it's, that's one of the things that when you learn to play music, you seem to become in some ways more conscious of that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember once Amanda, as you know, my wife and I went to the orchestra to see a show that was based on the music of John Williams of many movies fame. And one of the things Amanda noticed was after the first break, when they came back on and sat down in silence and the conductor came on and he started them off playing again, there was one horn player who started it and they played a single note for 2 beats, and I knew that was the theme to Jurassic Park.
Yes.
And that had been ingrained. I loved that movie, but I think that, I don't know, I had at that time for that song, for whatever reason, there was that musical consciousness, I know what's coming next.
Yeah.
Much like you've just done with those notes that were the theme music for those wrestlers.
Yeah, the best one I've realised recently is the London Underground. Don't know if you've been in London recently. The public announce system, it starts off speaking of jingle going like doo-doo. That's not in tune at all, but it's the first 2 notes of the Home Alone soundtrack. Of the Home Alone theme tune, kind of like thing. It's the first 2 notes of that, to the point I was like, what is this, we can't think of it, we can't figure it out. And within half a minute of googling it, it came up, London Underground at Home Alone. I wasn't the first person to make this connection, and it's like, it's just someone with a glockenspiel somewhere hit 2 notes to get someone's attention, but those 2 notes mean something down the line. But then, as you say, it gets to the point where you can create those notes anytime. Like, if you're that horn player, you can evoke that emotion in yourself anytime. You can sit with that guitar and go, I'm going to get the wrestling feelings back with Mark. And then you can turn and be like, imagine an Elvis suit, guys, and you could launch into that. Or you could probably just as easily jump into, like, Mrs. Robinson, for example, and people in a room are going to go, this is excellent. Yeah. With that being my experience of musicians and sitting in Irish pubs and kind of after big events, someone's got a guitar, play this song, play that song. Do you find you struggle with that because you know less popular mainstream songs, or do you find when you're with your metal pals and this kicks off, you're like, shit, yeah, here I go?
Yes, I do struggle with more of the poppy ones. There was a time, for example, where I was getting better at that. I was learning a lot of Oasis, for example. I've become, in more recent years, more conscious of that, and because I've played metal and written metal songs for such a long time, I am branching out. I'm learning more pop songs. You've mentioned ABBA. I've been learning to play some ABBA stuff. I've been learning to play and try and sing some songs from your least loved musical, The Greatest Showman. Things that are way out of my, people would perceive as my normal comfort zone. But this is all music that has been there in my life, that I like it and I love it in some cases as much as the metal stuff, but I've never really tried to play it. Other things that I quite like is, you hear songs from musicals like La La Land. Like, one of my favourite pieces is City of Stars. and the the version where Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone are singing together. And one of the things I learned to play recently was a guitar based version of the way that they sing that.
Okay.
So for example,
Yeah.
if I may,
Go ahead.
so
Taking the gain off.
taking the gain off, we're into the acoustic zone and making brief apologies for how terrible this may sound, but for the purposes of illustration.
It's so wonderful. I mean, it's marvelous,
Yeah.
and it's it's things like you saying that's a guitar version of how they would sing it.
Yeah.
But me as a fan and people listening to that wouldn't go, "Oh, that's a guitar version of the way they would sing it." You can hear the song,
Yeah.
you know the notes. You're going, "He's playing City of Stars."
Yeah.
If you were to play the actual chords for City of Stars, it probably wouldn't sound exactly like that.
No.
There's parts of it in there, but
Yeah, when I searched for how to play that, I was searching City of Stars finger pick or finger style for guitar.
Okay.
And when I say it's in the style of them singing it,
Mm-hmm.
it's people who have cleverly composed it in such a way that it's the melody of them singing intertwined with the backdrop of the
Yeah.
stuff that you know. So for example, the bits that you know are those
Yeah.
parts,
Mm-hmm.
but then intertwined with that are things like so it's got a bit of the background rhythm, the background section that you know, but it's also got the lyrics or the notes of the lyrics,
Yes.
the melody of the lyrics put on top.
and that's what folk are kind of picturing, and you're seeing how it going, and it's easier to sing along with that because you're da-na-na-na. You can see it going up and down. This is maybe a massive aside. Is there a link, do you think, between you learning these other songs, ABBA, Greatest Showman, La La Land, whatever, to you previously were going on guitar journeys with Mikey?
Yeah.
You now live with your wife.
Yes.
And do you think your musical tastes in the house and your lifestyle are changing, so you're learning these things because it's what you're listening to more, or do you learn them for her, or do you play them to her or for her, or is that a discussion? I don't know how musical your household is.
Yeah, a lot of it is it's a really good point, and I don't think I've really thought about it in that way before. But yeah, it's certainly in part for Amanda. She was, when I met her, the world's largest ABBA fan. She knows songs that I've never even heard of. But and I had liked ABBA, but because of that passion from her, liking ABBA as much as I love Metallica, for example, then yeah, I've wanted to get into it more, and at the same time as wanting to explore new stuff on guitar, I wanted to learn them so that she could then hear them being played by me,
Yeah.
and bring a new dimension to it all. So let me think. So yeah, to answer your question, definitely influenced in part by Amanda and those circumstances, partly influenced by just a sheer desire to try more stuff on guitar. When I was growing up with Mikey and learning all this stuff, we were in the throes of learning any of this sort of music for the first time.
Yeah.
And like most people do, what you learn in your teens stays with you, because that's what's becoming ingrained in your hormonal driven self as you're growing up. So that stuff will always stay with you. But it's the course of life happening in other ways, like getting married, like finding and living with someone that you love, that you get their influences and want to bring that into something that you grew up with as well. So with that example, thinking about learning ABBA stuff, living with Amanda and taking that influence on board to play guitar, I'm trying to think if in the short spell of this podcast, if I can briefly remember a little bit of an ABBA song I've been learning recently. Bear with me a second, and we can see if we
You
can.
can always edit it out.
You can see if you recognise this.
going beautifully then.
We're getting there. Here we go again. Not quite.
It's that ability to jump songs will never cease to impress me.
So very, very
So,
ropey, but
yeah, but
you
very-
know what it was
Oh,
going for.
you've
right?
winner takes all clearly, but it's that ability to go from the style you were playing earlier to that.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting, and I know you've just learned that one, but how with ease you could play fast songs.
Yeah.
But you're learning a slower song now, and it's almost you can see your fingers just like going like, I've been here too long. Let's move a little bit. You can see. I know there's probably more to it than that,
Yes.
but do you find it hard to learn slow songs because you've grown up on fast songs at all, or no?
It's a different style. When I think it links to the point I made about not pigeonholing things too much. There might be people who would say, I like this style of music, therefore I won't learn to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I think having that open-mindedness to delve into them, as soon as you start to do that, you see really quickly and clearly that, oh man, that metal music was lifting from this blues music or these pop songs, and you can see that it's, you know, it's all part of one big canvas really.
Yeah.
And it's just about where you want to draw the lines, or if you draw any lines at all. So I don't find them hard, I find them different. I think one of the things I did always try growing up and still do is I'll try to listen to a song and figure it out by listening to it alone. So not looking at the music, not looking at how to play it. That's really tough.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge for the sake of it. Or, you know, if someone wants to sing a little bit of a melody, you might try and find some of the notes that fit that.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, when we were doing Winner Takes It All, this part is what I learned.
Yeah.
But I didn't learn how to play. But that bit where it's the sort of lyrical part of it, it just
You've worked that out.
sort of falls into place because you're in the right part of the guitar and you start to play around with it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's magnificent, I really do. I should go and jump back to metal again, we're kind of in and out.
That's cool.
Is your wife into metal music? Has she become into metal music? Has she joined you on your journey at any point? Like, you've got a spare ticket, will come along? Or is she just like, no, that's your thing, ABBA's our thing now, but metal's still your thing?
For the most part, it's still my thing.
Yeah.
There are certain songs, the likes of which are the ones you mentioned, the ones that leak out of that genre into the main populace, like everyone starts to know a little bit of them. Some Metallica songs, some Black Sabbath songs, some others. But largely it remains as a standalone thing for me.
Yeah.
It's because maybe they're most vigorous and angry, those are songs that it's just not Amanda's style, she's not into it. But one of the main things, something you've touched on there, are the gigs. And some of the bands, some of the really heavy bands, when you go and see them, this is not you sitting with popcorn and a drink and just watching the world float by. You know, you're standing down in a warm, cramped space, everyone's headbanging away and loving this. But as I'm sure you're predicting at the moment, and with some of these heavy bands, another force takes over, and it's no longer just bodies, but it's bodies who know together to collectively form this void in the middle of the room. And there's no longer anyone there, there's this space where you can see the floor that no one's ever seen before because they don't look down. But now this thing is there, there's this void, and the bodies are forming this shape, but they're not standing staring at it. They're starting to circle round as well. And this happens with the fastest songs, the most vigorous songs, the angriest songs. And of course this is what forms the basis of a mosh pit.
Yeah.
And the mosh pit is something that Amanda can't get into. That's not for her. She's very petite. It's not something that's her style. But this is again something that I mentioned earlier. For some people, a mosh pit is, as daft as it sounds, that's the therapy. This is you getting this massive adrenaline rush of running round in what looks like a really violent circle, and sort of getting a bit of anger out and going along with the really fast-paced, heavy music, and just going along with the people in this whirlwind of bodies, and then coming off at the side when you've had enough. The reason I say it seems like it's violent is because it's the most paradoxical, dichotomous place I've ever been in, and here's a story that will prove it to you, or at least exemplify it. I was at a gig with Mikey, Barry and a couple others recently for a band called Mastodon, and one of their songs was getting really heavy, and Mikey is a massive lover of mosh pits. As soon as one is even sniffed in the air, he's off, he's starting it, he's there, he's living it. And I'll join for a couple of them, the ones I think I can survive, and it's because I think they look violent, but as soon as you get there and you're sort of running round, you might get a little bit of a push, but then in the whirlwind of this particular mosh pit, someone's arm flew up and knocked the glasses off my face, and they went flying about 2 feet in front of me in the middle of this bloody hailstorm of bodies. That's it, they're vaporised, they're gone, they're dust. But because I'm so blind, I started looking around and all these bodies are still flying by me. But then people started to notice, like, what are you doing? And I was sort of scrambling a little bit, and I had the light on my phone. I looked up and I just went like this, so I put circles round my eyes, and people knew immediately that guy's lost his glasses. Everything stopped. Phones came out of the pockets and lights went on the floor.
Jesus, that's brilliant, isn't it? That's
I found my glasses
incredible.
unharmed, untainted, back on my face, and then it all kicked off again. But you see, that was a really, personal example for me. Like, I was amazed that my glasses survived, but it's that sort of paradoxical camaraderie and something that from the outside looks like a war zone, but it's not like that at all. And what you see most often is you won't see glasses flying all the time, but someone might have a slip because there's wet and there's drinks everywhere, but everyone stops and always picks someone up. And outside that, so that's a mosh pit. But a similar thing that I remember now, having said that story, was a video I saw of a Foo Fighters gig, so not in any way metal, rock that came out of the embers of Nirvana, with Dave Grohl having been in Nirvana. But there was a video I saw where a fight broke out in the middle of the Foo Fighters gig, and he spotted it from the stage.
Right.
And he stopped the gig and made sure the two people that were fighting got chucked out because they didn't want that sort of violent atmosphere at the gig.
Wow. That's amazing.
And a sort of loose and tenuous link, that is sort of like a mosh pit. You think this is something that's a riot breaking out in the middle of the gig, but it's absolutely at the heart of a lot of these metal gigs. And it's not meant to be violent, it's meant to be an escape or an outlet for people without it being a fight, without people harming one another.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a question here that's about as niche as it gets.
Go for it.
I went to see that popular band from 20 years ago, The View, recently.
Who?
You're right, okay. So The View,
I remember.
indie,
Yeah.
one good album, 2006, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So I've got a friend, Gordon, who still loves The View.
Yes.
Genuinely travels Britain to see The View.
Wow.
I don't even think The View travelled Britain to see The View, but Gordon does. But they were playing the ABC, God rest its soul, in Glasgow. So I went along and was like, right, fuck it, we'll see The View. Room was full of kids, and I'm 30, but there was a lot of like 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I was blown away that The View had a fan base. Never mind a fan base who I don't think were born when they were popular, it feels like. But we were like, this is grand. Started playing the hits.
Yeah.
Had a few beers, we get into it. A mosh pit develops. I'm like,
Really?
we're hitting this up, we're getting mad with it, right? So how Scottish do you want to be? So we go down and I'm like, yes, mosh pit, right? Jump in the middle of it and there's no one there. And I get pulled back and they're like, the kids are like, not yet, not yet. And they're like waiting for a crescendo or a moment in the song.
Yes.
And I was like, this is too organised. Surely this should just be a small circle of bedlam, then we all go about our day. But it was planned.
Yeah.
Is that a thing? Has it always been a thing and I've just been ignorant to it?
Yes.
Holy, I genuinely came out of it and I was like, these kids don't even know how to mosh. This is ridiculous. I thought they just started and evolved themselves.
Yes.
But it's a thing to like wait, and release.
Yeah, and there's
Wow.
a very special subset of that. So a mosh pit could go on for an entire song, and that is where you get the small circle developing. People will sort of be bashing around, pushing each other almost at random and aimlessly. The story that I described from my own experience was what people would normally refer to as not a mosh pit but a circle pit. So it's more patterned in the way that people are pushing around. It is like a whirlwind. It is.
You said whirlwind a lot, which is giving me a different mental image from what I've experienced in mosh pits.
Yeah. So there's that sort of circular nature to it, and a lot of the time they break out based on a part of a song, a crescendo in a song, or a part where a song explodes into something really fast or heavy. The most, I dare say, extreme version of this is named in a way that would make you think he's talking rubbish, these things are violent. It's called the Wall of Death.
Okay.
And that's where it's not a circle, it's not random people pushing each other, but people can sense that a part of a song is about to kick off. Or even some bands will know they're about to play that and elongate the part before it so that people can get ready for this thing. And so in a Wall of Death, what tends to happen is the audience will bifurcate. There'll be a slice right down the middle, and half will go towards the left wall and half will go towards the right. And this will be,
picture this.
This will just be, they'll be soaking into the sides of the walls, waiting for this song to break. And as soon as it does, they come crashing towards each other and then just go nuts in the middle.
Wow.
And everyone starts headbanging again.
That sounds dangerous.
Yes.
Like, just thinking of like people pushing. I've never seen that. I've never even heard of that. That's mind blowing. Have you been a part of one of these?
I have never. Mikey has been a part of several, and I think this is the nature of whether you see these mosh pits or circle pits or walls of death probably appear. It's the first time I've ever said that sentence out loud. But it's probably related to just how heavy the band is, and what style of metal they're playing, what sort of subset of that umbrella they're in.
Okay.
So some bands you'll see more of those walls of death, some of it will be mosh pits, some of it, like the likes of Iron Maiden for example, you don't really see any of that sort of thing because it's not the style of really viscous, dark and heavy stuff that calls for that sort of thing. A lot of people, because Iron Maiden are more operatic, are standing facing Iron Maiden singing along to it all.
Mind being blown here. I feel we're at the point in the evening where I want to ask a kind of main question of the reason I have ever asked you this, the reason we're doing this podcast is entry level. I've heard of some of the big four.
Yes.
Master of Puppets got you in.
Yes.
What would get me in? If I was going to go to my Spotify, my iTunes, my YouTubes, what would be, say, 3 songs, 3 bands, for example, that I would look into, and why do you think they'd be the ones?
Let me play you a riff from one song of the one band we've mentioned many times, a song that you will know that lets me answer your question, and it gives you an album with which to start with. Tell me if you recognise this. Which eventually evolves into...
Take me that long. Metallica?
Metallica.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen.
Enter Sandman.
Yes.
Probably the most radio played
Yeah.
metal song in the world ever, of any time.
Yeah.
That was part of an album that relates back to that very first t-shirt that I mentioned,
Okay.
that black t-shirt that had
See.
an almost translucent faint snake on the back that you couldn't fully see. The Black album, it was really a self-titled album. It was called Metallica, but it had this really faint cover where it was mostly black. But that album was the fifth part in the Metallica story in terms of studio albums, and it was one that took them from the core of the metal scene and the front runners in a string of bands in the 80s to the world stage, where they got a new producer and they started creating these songs that were more than just metal songs. They were rock and metal anthems that more people could get on board with, and it took them all around the world. Enter Sandman is the archetypical song of that type. It's the one that gets more people in. It's one of those songs, like you mentioned, that seeps out of the metal culture into the mainstream. And if people want to start to get into metal, something like the Black Album by Metallica is a fantastic place to start. One thing I would really encourage is something I mentioned earlier, is looking at some of these metal documentaries, because it tells you about things like the Big Four and thrash metal, but it will also tell you about who influenced them, bands like Black Sabbath and the earlier rock bands like Thin Lizzy and Deep Purple and bands like that. But it goes even further back and thinks about blues and other forms of music.
What led into rock and roll, which led to this shock rock. It's all the kind of progressive.
Before there was ever a term of metal music, all of that sort of stuff. And starting way at the beginning of metal music with Black Sabbath, an album like Paranoid, one of their most famous albums, one of their most famous songs, gets you into that form of music, metal music, while still having a lot of the blues and rock influences. And nowadays, with the sorts of really heavy metal and more specialised forms of metal that you get, it seems more accessible than some of the other stuff that's out there.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, I'll say final question, but it probably won't be. We've had Ozzy in the beginnings, Ozzy Iron Maiden, we've had your Metallicas and maybe this in the middle. You said Mikey already is probably more into discovering music. Is there a modern metal band that right now you're like, these guys have just sprung up, these are young guys, these are good, or even a band that you're sitting going, I've just discovered them, but they're from 2002. What's your most recent metal discovery, possibly could be the question?
You've said it right in that there's another person who could answer that better than me. And in fact, in coming here tonight, I asked him this question. So we're going to get some of the names of those bands and put them in the show notes for people. A band that I got into some years ago, which are more modern, is a band called Trivium.
I've heard of them. I've seen T-shirts in the Cat House, to be honest.
So they were for me a really interesting band, because these were guys who started out in high school, and the guys who started that band were winning awards for how good their intricate guitar playing was. They were playing solos and intricate stuff on guitar that was way above any of the stuff that I'd heard, even in the most intricate of metal that I'd heard from the 80s and 90s. And they were playing a lot of sophisticated songs as well. But for me, and maybe a lot of other people that are put off by metal, is they were a mixture of really clear audible singing where you could hear all the lyrics, and something that we haven't spoken about tonight, which is a lot of the more gruff, growling type and screamed lyrics.
We haven't even touched on singing at all, have we?
So a band like Trivium and some others have a mixture across their albums of that sort of stuff, which means that if you start off with the sort of metal like Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Metallica, the bands where the songs and the lyrics are really crystal clear most of the time, a band like Trivium can be a foray, a dipping of the toes into the other side of the coin, where you've got these more growled lyrics where the fact that they're almost inaudible is part of the music of the song. It's part of the anger behind it, part of the venom behind that sort of song, but it takes a little bit of getting into.
Excellent. Thank you very much for all. I mean, I feel like we could have spoken for hours on this. There's so many more questions that have come to me and will come to me in the future, but as far as an introduction to it, I almost asked the question, where did the name metal come from? But I then thought, where does rock and roll come from? Where do names come from? But it's such a word that describes it, and everything you've shown me this evening has been inexplicably metal. Everything you've played apart from the ABBA has been, yeah, that's metal. I recognise that as metal.
Yes.
I've certainly learnt a lot from it, so thank you very much for taking us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure. It's been great to take the dust off of this old guitar and get it going again.
It's a shame to hear us getting dusty in its old age and our old age.
That's only because there's another one that I play more. But it's been a blast. Thanks, Mark.
Not at all, thank you very much. This has been another episode of Compelling and Rich, and I hope you've definitely found it compelling and rich. I'm Mark McLaughlin.
I'm Mark Reid.
And we'll see you next time.